Welcome back to our 12th episode on how to build a habit tracker. Today I'll show you one way on how to implement the global streak counter at the top of the app. I'm sorry for the delays for this video. I've been really busier than usual on my current work. I believe this is the last video for the habit tracker. I'll also offer you a few recommendations if you want to personalize it more at the end. So to start, for the app, in the habit service, what I want to do is I want to create a new storage. So app storage, and I'm going to create a new storage that is for the global streak. So I'll call it global streak key, and I will put it as global streak, which is going to be an integer. And it's going to be set at 0 by default. So you'll see it's pretty simple for this part. There's going to be something a little bit more complex that we'll need to implement a bit later on. So for now, this is going to be it. In our data queries, I want to create two more queries. So it's going to be, one is going to be to increase our global streak. And the second one is going to be to reset the global streak. So these are going to be two things I can put as to do. And next, in our habit view, the habit list view model, habit list view, not the model. So in the UI, what I want to change is going to be the streak. So the implementation of the button streak, I don't know if you remember, but we implemented the logic for days and the number. So I can always go actually in our habit button view, go to our logic implemented here, copy this, and move it back here. Now it's going to throw an error. The reason for is that we don't have an habit. The model is not exactly the same. So when we go in our model here, actually I'm going to create a new published variables, which is going to be our global streak. And our global streak will be set to 0 at the beginning, and I can implement the logic just a bit later. Instead here, the view model dot streak and all, I'm just going to set global streak. And for this one here, it's going to be the same thing. So we're going to have the global streak, and it's going to look if it's equal to 1 or not, and we're going to change the day or days. This is the only change to the GUI that is required. The rest is going to be mostly in the back-end logic. In our habit list view model, outside of our global streak, we will need to implement some initialization in our init function, and we also need to implement a logic to refresh the streak. So first I'm gonna just refresh the streak. So refresh global streak, and it's gonna be something pretty simple. Basically our global streak will equal to habit service dot shared dot global streak. You'll see here the great thing about it when it's not stored as a data type is you don't need to do a conversion. So you can actually just use that as a regular variables that you can store, and it's gonna every time update. So you don't need to have like data conversion happening or anything to make it work. So it's a little bit easier concerning the app storage for that type of data. Outside of that, this is pretty much what you want for the refresh logic for your global streak, very similar to the other one. For the init, however, so you'll want to refresh the habit and we'll want to refresh the global streak. And we'll actually have a bit more logic to implement later on in here. Now let's go back to our habit service and we can do the simple logic for the func increase global streak. It's going to be very simple. So our global streak, if we want to increase it, is going to be plus equal 1. And the resets is basically we set it to 0. Oops, global streak, it is equal to 0. So our logic here has been implemented as well, which is very simple logic. I can remove the to do here. If you want to remove the comment, you can feel free to remove the comment. It's pretty straightforward, the name of the function, what it does. So you don't really need to keep those. Outside of that, in our habit, the way now it's gonna work. The logic for this is gonna be a little bit more complex. When you think about when to check if you should increase the global streak, whenever we set a habit as done, it's all done in the logic for our button. So in our habit button view model, whenever we click on this button, we increase the streak for that one button, which is all right if it's the same date as if it's not the same date as today. What we want to do is whenever we increase that streak, we want to look into if all of our habit have been done or not. If they're all done, we can increase the streak. If not, we reset it. That's one way to do it. There's multiple ways to do it. You could say that this counter at the top is done whenever one of the habit is done. And that's also a good way to do. So we'll go ahead and implement the streak here. So we'll need to implement a few things for this logic. First, we'll want to implement some sort of update global streak function. That update global streak function is going to look into if we should increase or not the global streak. Oops, global streak. And basically the way we can do that is to set a variable. This variable will help us keep track of all habit when we loop through them. So all habits are done equals to true. You'll see the way it works is we'll set it to true at the beginning. When we loop through our habit list, if any of our habit are not done, we'll turn that to false, which will stop us from increasing the global streak. That's probably the easiest way to do it. So we'll do a for loop and I'll call our habit H. The reason for it is that we basically have our habit that is published here and I don't want to make it confusing for the code of which habit we're using. So habit service shared and retrieve habits. And basically here we're gonna loop through all of our habits that we have saved, and we're gonna use this variable H as the one that are currently looping through. We'll do a search to see if it is not last day as same as today. And we'll need to change this a little bit. But basically, we will want to set this as all habit are done to false if they're not all same as today for the last dates. And at the end, basically, if all habits are done, we want to habit service dot shared. We want to increase our streak. So the changes we will need to do for is last date same as today are going to be quite extensive. In some ways, it's going to still keep the same structure, so you still want to keep the formatter and all, but we'll add some parameters to it. And the first parameter I want to add is the date. And the reason for it is that I want to be able to provide a different date to compare if it is the same as today. This different date is going to be optional and it's going to be set to nil by default. So all the places that I already used this is last date as today. I want to keep the same logic that I was using before, where I'm going to use similar logic as this. However, if I put a date specified, I want to look at this date and not the date that is the last done. The second one that I want to add is going to be something to let me know if I'm currently using the same habit as this button or if I'm using whichever habit that I can. And the reason for it is in our loop here, we're looping through multiple habits and we're not necessarily using this same habits here. But everything else, everywhere else we use this, we're using it related to this one. And this little flag is button habits set to true. Will allow me to not mention it and specify it, but if I specify it should look at other buttons, I should set that to false and it will allow me to look at other buttons a bit without throwing an error with the last done. We're always comparing the last done. So this is the parameters I want to add. Inside of our function, we'll be able to remove the first condition and the return false at the end. So this is the first change in our function. We have our formatter that's still going to be used. Formatter. And today's dates. And now it's going to be logic for the date to compare. Date to compare. So for this, I'm going to create a new var and it's going to be called date to compare. And this date to compare is going to be set to just an empty string as a default. This will allow us to look into return at the end and our last date done. Oops, I'm going to need to rename this. Date to compare, if it is an empty string, it won't be equal to today. So if it's null, the date to compare, or if we don't have any, it's going to return false. If we have something, we'll compare it and we'll return false or true. So this is the first step. The second step, we'll want to implement a condition to look into first, are we looking at our same button date that we should use like this one? Or should I look at the date provided? So to do this is going to be first is button habit. So is it the button habit that I'm looking at? If it is, good, I'll be able to look at this. However, we need a flag here. We need this to not be null. So as a second condition, I want to make sure that my habit dot last date done isn't equal to null. If that's the case, our date to compare will be using our formatter string, and we'll look into our habit last date done. So we changed our code now to reflect what was previously done. Now, what I want to do is I want to create a new condition. And some people love to put else if, else if, else if, and some people prefer having if condition each time. I prefer, depending on the situation, since I'm looking at the date to compare value, I prefer to do an else if. And our else if is going to look if it is not our button habit necessarily. And if our date isn't equal to null, we will want to use a date to compare and set it up to the formatter dot string from date. So the date that was provided that we want to compare with. And since it's not null, we should just put the flag saying it's okay. So now that our is last date same as today refactor, we're able to look into our loop. Oops, where's my loop here? Oh, my loop. And we're able to pass in a different date. So for the different date here, we'll want to look at first the habit, so the H, last date done. That's what we're going to pass in. It can always be null or it can always be with a previous date. And is button habit, it is not, because we're looping through different habits that are not necessarily related to this button. And so this is going to be allowing us to looping through each one of our habit and make sure that all of them are done. If they are, we'll be able to increase our global streak. Let me see. I can probably test it now. Get started. Edit, delete, delete. Let me see if this is good or not. So we can see the streak, the day streak is still set to 1. And I'm assuming is when we loaded, there was already 2 tests that were marked as done. So let's put 1, habit 1, test. We'll add a second one. And so we'll put, let's say this, habit 2 tests. And I'm going to add a third one. Oops. Habit 3 tests. All right, so we have our 3 habit. If I click on one, you can see it didn't increase. If I click on the second one, still didn't increase. If I click on the third one, still didn't increase. Let me check something real quick. I think this is because of the UI, it doesn't refresh. Okay. And I think it's the UI that didn't refresh, first of all. And even when I deleted it, I think the UI just don't refresh. The reason for it is that we need to implement what I was starting to talk about in the habits here. We'll need to implement our event handler. So this is one way of creating some sort of event handler. And the reason for it is our global streak, when it gets updated, our view model doesn't know it got updated. And our button in our habit button view model doesn't have access to our list view model refresh global streak. So what happens then is that whenever we click on a button, this refresh global streak, nothing happens. One way to do it is in our habit service, we'll want to create a variable. It's actually a constant, so we can create let, and I'm going to call it habit service changed. And it's going to be a pass-through subject. I actually need to import combine pass-through subject and it's going to be void never. And so this is going to allow us to send some event that happened to this one. So whenever we call, you'll see, or we actually need to, in our habit service, we'll need to have here a little habit service change dot send. We're not sending anything specific. We're just basically saying that habit services change, and we can do this here as well, and I can put it under each one of them. But since they're all calling the same habit, what I can do is I can basically just add it to our saved habit, right? Save habits. And so now whenever anything happens in this service, it's going to say that it changed. The value here changed. The way I can know this from our habit list view model is to create something very similar. So we'll go ahead in our habit list view model and create the same variable. Void never. So our let habit service changed, and I'm going to create a second one, which is going to be a private type, and this is going to be a variable which is going to be called, I need to import combine cancel labels equals sets any cancelable, and that's it. And the way we implement these two is in our init function. It's going to be event handler. We could create a new function to create our event handler in, or you can put it inside the init, and it's going to be basically habit service dot shared dot habit service changed, and we'll have a dot receive, and it's going to be a receive, not right on, it's going to be a receive, sorry, not subscriber, receive on dispatch queue dot main and dot sync, and I need to create a new bracket, and it's gonna be something like week self underscore in and in, and we have self dot refresh habit and self dot refresh global streak and dot store in and cancelable. And so basically, if you look, at our event handler, the logic of what's going to happen when this is sent will happen here. And the reason why we have a self question mark is that the window might not exist when the event happened. So this is just to make sure it exists. If it exists, we refresh habit and refresh global streak, and it avoids throwing an error. So our event handler here is created. And if our habit dot counts is equal to 0, our streak, global streak, shouldn't equal to anything. So this is one way to reset our global streak. And another thing that I want to reset is when we look at was it the button view? Validate streak. So when we reset one of our streak, I want to basically reset habit service dot share dot reset global streak. So the two ways to reset a global streak is if there's nothing, no habits available. And the second one is whenever we loop through our habits, if one hasn't been done for 2 days, I want the streak to be gone. And that's an easy way to do the reset global streak. So we have the way to increase based on the formatter. We have the way to delete, reset, and we have our event handler here that has been created. Technically here, this habit service, you can see it's not used anywhere. Currently, we're just basically using the habit service change. I could actually just call it maybe like, let me see if I should just call it UI change. And the reason why I want to create this is that if I keep it as is, a lot of will happen in the back and it will refresh before these values as time to update. So the UI will still be the same and the publish will have like a little like, it kind of glitch with the, published variable. So in our refresh habit and global streak, I want to basically do a UI change.send, and it's going to allow to force the UI to update whenever we update these. Now, let's try this again. Let's build it again. Let's do get started. And so we have 1 day streak. Let's say I delete everything. I delete everything. Oh, it's because I want to end it. Sorry. Let me actually save. And actually, I'll just try another new thing. Test 1 or whatever, add plus, I'll just put some letters actually, so it's going to be a little quicker. And let's say we do 1, it doesn't increase. 2, it doesn't increase as well, or it increased and it didn't update. Let's give it a try. Okay, I'm missing something here. Let me see what I'm missing. All right, sorry for the little break. I had to search what I was missing, where I was missing something, and going back through the code, I forgot to call something really important. So we're never updating our global streak. So whenever we increase our streak here, we should be looking at updating our global streak. So that's probably the reason why it was not working since the beginning. And we were not able to increase it. So let me actually try this again real quick. Okay, thanks for waiting. I basically created a few little habit that I could use. So whenever I click on first one, it's still at 0. Second one, still at 0. Third one, and we all finally have our day increase. If now I quit this and I reopen, we can see our day is still here, still saved, and everything is still saved, and we're still able to edit and delete them. I've already deleted them before, so I won't go ahead and delete those new ones that I created. However, now I want to be able to test this day streak counter with all of these together. So let's say I create something and I test for the next day, set. I need to quit this here, close this, and run this again. And so we get started, and we can see our day streaker here for everything. If I go ahead and increase, second day with the S, everything is good. Fantastic. Now, let's say I move this by 1 day. Set. And you will see when I run this, why I update just by 1 day is I want to show you and test if it works if, let's say, I don't finish my list. So get started. I did this one. We have a 3-day streak. This one I didn't do. So our day counter is still at 2. All right. Set to 15. Set, close, and restart. Get started. You can see our counter is still at 3, 3, 0, and we lost our streak. So we can see the streak reset. Everything has been increased. If I do everything here and I edit and I delete all of them, that's one last thing I want to do so I can reset this. And otherwise, outside of that, everything should be done. So you will see here in our habit list view, the habit service, what I want to do is actually when I delete a habit is I want to look into, I'll just create a update global streak. And I'll create here after resets func update global streak. And this is going to be something that's going to look at our habit if habit dot count dot equals to 0. We want to set our global streak equals to, actually we can just call reset global streak. And so reset global streak will send the event change and it should be updating everything. So replace, we'll create a new one. Very simple change, get started, add, and let's say add this one here, we'll quick with random text, add, it's done, it increased, it did, delete, it sets to 0. So we see our global streak has been implemented to follow, make sure that all of our streak in our list has been done, and every streaks are handled individually. Now, this is the end of my tutorial for the habit tracker. If you feel like you want to work more on it, you want to personalize it more, I've got the image here of our habit tracker templates, if you want to change the colors, if you want to implement new functionality you could think your user could like, if you want to implement this little calendar here, you have access to the calendar value. We've been looking at dates in the format of dates. You can use some UI, put 7 UI element here, like a little bit with the buttons, and you can create something similar to the buttons with, instead of using the text that the user implement, you can use the today's date, and you can make it work by week, or you can make it move every single day and use this one as the last one of the calendar, so you can see a little dot whenever it's done, or change the color whenever it's done. And that little streak implementation could be better implemented. If you feel like you have any functionality you want to implement or want to change, feel free to do so. If you feel like you want to refactor the code, if you feel like you have better ways to make it cleaner, nicer, remove some comments or restructure stuff, if you want to try to use instead the habit service as like the value instead, and because you have access to the event handler now, you could always look into changing the way the logic works for the view models, how they access their value. Feel free to do so. Otherwise, if you have any question or any issues with your code, I know this is a bit more tricky. There's a lot happening in this one. Don't forget to put a comment down below. Otherwise, like this video and subscribe if you want to look up what the next tutorial is going to be about. Thank you for watching.